Hi, I'm Brandon Briscoe, and welcome to another episode of The Postscript, Living Faith Bible Institute's weekly podcast and YouTube series devoted to interviewing pastors and professors from LFBI and across the Living Faith Fellowship, with the hope that each week when we come together, we'd be encouraging you and strengthening you in your faith. We're always talking about different subjects from theology to ministry life, and we want to know that it's a blessing to you. And so if it is, we want to remind you, please share it, promote it with your friends, maybe write a review on your favorite podcast platform. But we're so thankful for your support over the last year and a half, and we want to encourage you to continue to support us in whatever way you can. Now this week, I'm really excited about this interview. I think it's going to be particularly encouraging to people. And so maybe you know, or maybe you don't know, but about 50% of the enrollment at LFBI is female. And so we have a large number of female ministers that are growing in their faith at LFBI. And over the last year and a half, we've interviewed a lot of pastors and professors who all tend to be male, and they have their own perspectives on ministry, and it comes from that male leadership perspective. And so we haven't really had much of an opportunity to talk about what it's like to be an elder minister as a female, as a woman in ministry. And so this week, I'm really excited to introduce Cheryl Miles, Pastor Sam Miles' wife, who is also incredibly involved in ministry here at Midtown Baptist Temple. For many years, she's discipled. She runs a mom's small group here at the church that encourages and builds up women who have children and are at home and doing ministry at home. She's also done premarital counseling, and she mentors women at different stages of life. And she's such an important part of who we are as a church. And so we want to give you an opportunity to hear from her and about the transitions that she's faced in ministry over the years. And so we're so grateful and so thankful to have her here today. So we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
I hope you're ready for that.
I have no idea how to be ready for that.
We'll start with your story.
Okay.
Just how life began for you. So maybe you can tell us about how you were raised and where you grew up and what was life like as a kid.
I was actually born in the LA area, so Burbank, California. So I lived in that part of the world until I was about 5. My dad was an accountant, my mom a nurse. And my dad decided to start his own small business. So we moved to a place called Bishop, California, which is in the Sierra Nevada mountains in the high desert. Yeah. So right at like Mammoth Mountain, all that is right in that area. Okay. So I grew up on what I would call a little farm, a couple acres. We had horses, miniature horses, chickens, cut our own wood. I lived there till I was about 11. And my dad, having his own small business was extremely dedicated to that. Mm-hmm. We didn't see him, I think, a lot, unless he was needed. He was always there when we needed him, but he was just really busy, and he was a lay pastor. So he was a pastor of a cowboy church.
Oh, really?
So yeah, well, now it's like a technical thing, but at the time it was just a non-denominational Pentecostal church. And so he pastored that on the weekends. Okay. So we went up into the mountains, and it seemed like we, half the time would, go to church, and then we'd go up to somebody's cattle camp, and we, bring in cows and pull up sagebrush, and, we would work like that. I remember we're moving the outhouse today. So digging holes and
moving an outhouse.
Yeah.
That's a different life. I'm not familiar with that.
No. And you would drive.
I probably don't want to know much about
it. Was super fun. What a great way to grow up.
Yeah. If you say so.
It was great. On a horse all the time.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. So you were there for how long?
Till I was 11. And then my dad's father actually worked with the Great Passion Play in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. He was one of the people that helped found that. And so we moved to help. My dad was an accountant, so he took over the financial position for the Great Passion Play. And so we lived there until I was 17. And then and that I met Sam in that time frame, and then my family moved to East Tennessee, and we started a passion play there in Sevierville, Arkansas.
Another passion play.
Yeah.
And you were in the plays, weren't you?
Yes,
pretty consistently from
the time I was 11. So I was in the theater.
Wow.
So yeah.
Which is why your kids are kind of theatrical. They have the ability to perform. They've always been good on stage.
Seth, when he first started out, he would like have to look at his shoes because he absolutely could not look at the audience. So,
but now he's like,
he does fine.
Yeah, he does good.
Yeah.
So you were performing in that. How did you meet Sam though? Like,
I played the same part as his sister, Cheryl.
Okay.
And she set me up on a blind date with her brother.
What part was that?
Mary Magdalene.
You were Mary Magdalene.
So we had to like run up the hill and then, be all dramatic at the tomb when it opened,
Right.
and run down the hill and tell everybody. And yeah.
So Sam dated Mary Magdalene.
Gross. It's just weird. He played John the Beloved after a while.
So explain the years where you were dating. I know that you guys were off again there for a few years before you got married, and he was already in KC, right? Maybe you can explain that time frame.
Yeah, it's actually fairly complicated.
Well, maybe give us the simplest version of possible.
Well, we met when I was 16, and I immediately went for a summer in Japan.
Okay.
So I did like an exchange student program with the government. And so I was in Japan for a summer. And then when I came home, he was here at school at DeVry, getting his electronics engineering degree. And then, so for that, then after that, we moved away. So for my senior year of high school, I actually went to school in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
So it was very complicated.
You moved a lot.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you're down in Tennessee. He's in Kansas City getting his college degree. You're about to graduate high school.
So we were broken up at that point.
And you were a senior in high school, or?
Yeah, I actually went to the University of Tennessee for my senior year because I didn't want to start somewhere new. It just didn't make sense for me. So I only needed like 3 credits to graduate. So I just did it there.
So you were mature for your age.
Like dual credit. I don't know about that. I was very self-centered. I was going to accomplish what I was going to do.
Yeah, you're focused.
Extremely focused.
But he was kind of that way too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then how did you guys end up together with that so much distance and so much focused intensity?
Have you met him? Like, he's very intense.
Yes, he is.
And we stayed friends. So it was on again, off again. Like if we were together, then we, neither one of us was actually dating anyone else, then we were together. And if we were dating someone else, then we were friends.
Right.
It was just weird.
Yeah. So many relationships are like that.
Yeah.
It's hard to be young.
Well,
so dating is rough.
Well, and I think he is a lot more like, he was very committed to our friendship, and I was just all over the place. When I was in college, did a year of college in Australia as an exchange student again.
Wow.
It was fun.
And so he was lonely.
I don't know. I think he just went through his own really big ups and downs. Like he was really serious with someone and that didn't end up working out. And I think it was just time.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense. So when I came back home, we reconnected and we had stayed, like we wrote letters. This was in the age of letters. And it would take like 4 weeks to get a letter there. So, and he would send me like music tapes of whatever he was listening to.
Mixtapes?
Yes.
Sam sent mixtapes?
Absolutely, he did.
Do you still have those?
I probably have a few.
Oh my gosh.
And they were all hairband music. So yeah.
People would love to hear a Sam Miles mixtape.
I'll see what I can find.
Okay. All right. This is great. This is great. We're getting great information. So, okay. You're back and you've been writing these letters and so you're suddenly starting to see that maybe there's more or.
So when I finished in the summer, it was winter here. So I had a year and a half of school left. I came home, we kind of reconnected, but he had found KCBT and Alan Shelby, and he was a jerk. I mean, he was so like, you need the
like
King
a Bible
James
jerk.
version of the Bible.
But he had discovered something new and exciting.
And like everybody does, like you come through this pendulum where like, it was all lies.
Right.
Like everything I ever learned was a lie.
Right.
So, so the pendulum was like pinged way over here when I first got back. And so he was trying to convince me that I needed, all these things. And
he was particularly passionate about you. And so he wanted you and him to be on the same page probably.
The interesting thing is, though, that he, because of who he is and how he thinks, I knew that I could trust him to figure it out. And so by the time I came here for the summer, and I stayed with Tom and Mindy Herzog. This is what happened. I stayed with Tom and Mindy Herzog and went through like lightning discipleship. So I did all 16 lessons in 3 months. And it absolutely was like this, like on the top of my brain. And so God used the next semester for it to get into my heart.
Yeah.
So I had all the information, and then I was probably clinically depressed when I went back to school. Like I was just like, couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I couldn't figure out, what to do with all this information. Was I really, like everything I ever knew, was it wrong? I think everybody has to go through a time like that.
But usually they have a church there that discipled them to support them through that. But you were back at school and
and I went to King College in Bristol, Tennessee, which is kind of like Rockhurst here, only it's Presbyterian.
Oh, okay.
So, but getting established in the Word of God in a kind of a different way, like where the words actually mean something, and rather than the concepts of the, our forefathers being the thing that we run everything through. That was, it was pretty traumatic for me. And also having a Pentecostal background. So it's all of it at one time. And basically during that time too, because Sam wasn't sure where I stood, he was like, come here, baby. No. Come here, baby. No. Like he was trying to hold me off as far as emotional connection, but then also we were in love. So it was extraordinarily confusing to me. So when I got back to school, I finally just was like, I don't care what happens. I can't do this anymore. And I broke up with him. And a few weeks later, he was calling to just make sure I hadn't like fallen off a cliff or, because he knew I was a mess.
Right.
And I knew I was going to come back to Kansas City, even though I had a job lined up in Japan. And I had, I just had a lot of things that I was working through, like, what am I going to do next? And I had all these options open. But I really knew that what I needed was to get established in God's Word. And then I could do all those things later if I needed to or if I wanted to. I was afraid that I would not travel. I was afraid if I got married or if I settled down, because that was like the antithesis of the 80s girl. You don't want to be settled down.
Right.
So I was afraid if I settled down that I wouldn't do all the things I wanted. Like I wanted to do a flat in Tokyo and one in New York and one in LA. And I wanted to, kind of be a jet setter is what I thought. It's far away from Berryville, Arkansas, and where I went to high school. It's just seemed like it had to be, it's that pendulum thing,
You wanted to experience things that you hadn't experienced before, and you're already used to traveling and going different places. And you kind of had the bug.
Oh, yeah. Which is a really big problem at about 7 years of marriage. Because I was like, what's wrong?
You got antsy.
Oh, yeah. Very. Because I had never lived anywhere more than about 7 years. So it just seemed like something, I was waiting for the next shoe to drop. And just realizing that's what it was is what it took for me to get through.
Right.
It was weird. That
is a weird thing.
Yeah.
So you knew in your heart that you were going to come to KC, like all along.
I knew it's what I needed.
Yeah.
But I was resistant. I mean, I didn't want to necessarily not do everything I wanted. And it's hard to tell your parents, well, I've got this great job in Japan, but I'm going to go see what I can find in Kansas City. And that's what I did. I mean, I turned down an amazing, it's called the Japanese JET program, and Japanese educational teachers something. And it was, it was 25 years ago or longer. I've been married almost 30 years. So it was like 33 years ago.
Wow.
And they paid actually an amazing salary and your living expenses. So it was, unheard of for somebody with, just basic Japanese and a business degree, international business degree.
So it was a great opportunity.
Great opportunity. And so my parents were like, are you sure?
Yeah.
And I came and lived with Donna Bruce. And
And then did you do discipleship again? Or did you feel like what happened? What were the next steps like in order to find, what you needed?
Basically what happened was I came back, and at that point, at that time at KCBT, you had to get baptized in order to join the church if you were from a different denominational background. And we don't do that at MBT anymore, but that was a gate.
Yeah.
And for me, it wasn't a bad gate.
Sure.
But I had already been baptized biblically. We didn't say this. I did get saved when I was a little girl, probably a little bit before the time we moved to Eureka Springs, Arkansas.
Okay.
And I loved school because I knew it would take me places, and I loved boys. And so
And they don't take you places.
They know. They
those two things.
End up being, yeah.
And what were the next steps? You got baptized.
I got baptized, and the day I got baptized, Sam asked me to marry him. So then we planned the wedding.
That guy.
Mm-hmm. The story is awesome.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. No, he took me out. We were going to have a steak dinner, and we ended up behind a restaurant that's no longer there. And so he was so long-winded that the restaurant closed before he actually asked me to marry him. So, yeah.
So, okay. So you're here. I mean, I've heard him say that he wanted to know that you were bought in. Yeah. That was like the big thing for him, is to know that you were coming for the right reasons and that you wanted to follow the Lord. And
we weren't dating when he asked me to marry him.
Yeah. Which sounds like a Sam thing.
It does, kind of, doesn't it? Yeah. So it's important to note that before I came back to do discipleship, that one of the things that I noticed about Sam was that he had grown. Mm-hmm. During our time apart, he wasn't just a Bible basher anymore, that he had actually grown in Christ, and that his intimacy with the Lord had completely changed. Mm-hmm. And so rather than having to tell me what I needed to think all the time, he was just talking about how God's word was changing his heart. Mm-hmm. And that then was really interesting. And so I got a little jealous, because I always want to be first. Yeah. Type A personality.
Sure.
If it's awesome.
You saw something you wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so that's why I ended up coming for the summer. Mm-hmm. That first time to go through discipleship and works temp. And I mean, that all worked out.
So you guys got married. Mm-hmm. At that time, what was your identity in ministry like? I mean, you'd been at KCBT for some time at this point. And so who were you
I was
becoming?
at KCBT for 3 months before I got married.
Before you actually got married? Before the actual wedding day?
Yeah, because I got there at the beginning of June, July, August. Wow. Then we got married the 26th of September.
So then you didn't even have a chance to find an identity.
Oh, yeah, I had no idea.
In ministry. It was all so new to you. Uh-huh. So
and
you were
I worked as a temp through that summer.
Okay.
And I went on staff at the temp service. That's my job was in human resources until I had Sophie. So I worked at the temp service. After we got married, I actually went full time there. Okay.
So you're figuring out marriage and ministry at the exact same time. Like, who am I supposed to be in terms of the work of the kingdom?
And a new job.
Wow.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to the show. We're going to pause right here for just a second so we can hear from one of our students from the Living Faith Bible Institute.
Mason Wilson here. I'm one of the pastors at Harvest Baptist Church in Iola, and I wanted to share with you how Living Faith Bible Institute has been an invaluable tool for my life and ministry. As a young man, I was zealous for the Lord and for His Word, and so I did what anyone would do when I had questions. I turned to the internet, but oftentimes that would leave me with more questions than answers, and it led to me doubting God's Word. And so when I found Living Faith Bible Institute, it was a godsend to be able to sit under like-minded pastors and leaders and learn the certainty of the words of truth. And so for that, I'm incredibly grateful for Living Faith Bible Institute.
If that interests you at all, please visit lfbi.org and consider enrolling in classes.
And so we bought a house. We had wolf hybrid dogs. So we had big dogs to take care of. We were remodeling. I mean, we were constantly going, and it was like Hyatt. So we had all these friends, and, it was smaller, maybe more intimate, but we had all these friends, all these things we were doing. And actually for me, the very best thing was that we were involved in international student ministry, which is what I had done all through college. I was an international student RA, and my job was teaching English as a second language. So that was amazing for me to just hop right into what Shelby was doing.
Yeah.
And God's word started to prove itself to me.
Yeah.
Because I could go back and be like, oh yeah, this isn't in there. Mm-hmm. And I knew all those things from D2 because I went through D2. But
so you were working mainly discipling internationals, is that, or was it just other college? No,
it was just other college. Well, or
young adults.
Other young adults. Yeah. And some college students, just depended on who.
And so ministry is exciting.
Yeah.
And it's, probably month over month, Sam's getting more responsibilities in ministry. And
by the time, like not long after we got married, then he was in charge of discipleship.
Mm-hmm. So then at what point did Sam start realizing that maybe he was called to the pastorate? And what was that like for you to discover that?
He told me before we got married.
He already knew.
He was like, we might end up in a hut in Africa.
He wanted to warn you of the most extreme situation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And you were down with that?
Well, I'm like, I lived on a horse farm.
You were adventurous.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I didn't actually probably think it all through. Like, I wouldn't necessarily want to have babies in a hut in Africa. But I was down.
Yeah. And so
before I would marry him, I had to know I would follow him.
Yeah.
I had to know that I trusted him to follow the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So, because that was one of the big things with my dad. We moved, but my dad always felt like the Lord was moving him. And so if we couldn't pick up our whole life, then he wasn't going to follow the Lord. And so we had to learn how to turn our heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I remember, I mean, at least as far as how Sam tells it, he goes and he has a pretty, powerful conversation with Alan that he feels called. And, and Alan supported him in that. And then, so in that season of life, when he was kind of transitioning towards ordination and the pastorate, what was life like and how did things change for you? Did anything change right away or?
I had a really good example. So Cheryl Adams was amazing because she was just herself. Mm-hmm. Like she never tried to be, bigger or smaller.
And some of our listeners might not know who Cheryl Adams is.
Yeah, Cheryl Adams is Jeff Adams' wife. So at Graceway, which was KCBT at the time, she was like in the four-year-olds class as a teacher. She didn't try to do anything beyond like her main focus was taking care of Jeff and taking care of her kids. Mm-hmm. And so, with a big church and all of the things that Jeff was involved in, that just making sure he had what he needed was somebody has to take care of him.
Yeah.
And so she just kept it very simple during that time. Mm-hmm. And so I never felt any pressure to be anything else.
Just to be yourself and take on what you could take on.
Like none of it was a surprise to me. Mm-hmm. Like I was a PK. Even though I didn't necessarily want to be, we talked about this a little in the off time, was that, anybody who's a pastor's kid probably doesn't want to be a pastor's wife,
right?
Or maybe even a pastor. Mm-hmm. And you just don't always get to pick. Mm-hmm. But I was very prepared. Like I knew what it was going to take to be the wife of somebody who is very consumed. So
what did it take? I mean, maybe explain for us just practically, what did change? I mean, I know that you stepped away from your job at a certain point, but that had probably as much to do with the kids. Maybe just tell us what that transition. So
I was in human resources and I loved my job. I was making a lot of money. Mm-hmm. It was very satisfying because, I could interview 13 people and find 13 people great jobs every day. It just felt like I was making a difference. Yeah. So during that point, I left my wonderful job and had a baby. Mm-hmm. I went from getting like dressed in cute clothes and going to my job where they paid me a lot of money to match people up and to coming, to feeding a child off my body that I pushed out of my own body. Yeah. And feeling gross and not knowing how to make a schedule because this person will not cooperate, and cleaning up poop and then suddenly having to do all the housework myself because I was home and he was, feeling like our roles changed fairly dramatically. Right. Instead of necessarily partnering in the home things. I was home so I could do that stuff, but I hadn't ever done it all.
So I think, a lot of the young women, at least in Kaya and the ministry I'm involved in, I'm sure a lot of listeners as well, have faced or are facing very similar transitions right now. So, they got married, they're starting to have babies. And for a lot of these women, they're very involved in ministry. They're discipling. Their primary identity, in fact, is the ministry. Like they've organized their whole lives to make sure that they can invest. And then when this transition takes place, coaching them through that
traumatic.
life change is very difficult. And so do you have maybe you can explain what helped you get through that time or change your perspective on yourself or the ministry or?
Yeah, it was painful. So let's start with that. It took me a long time. And I think most people, you can tell them everything, but until they actually break in half, push someone out their body, and then feed them off of their body, and everything they eat affects that person. And like, it stops being about you. And until you actually go through that, where it's like, it literally is nothing about me, at least for the first, 2 months before you're like, I'm a person again.
Sometimes a year or two before you realize that, like, it's hard to find
even
yourself.
Just being a person, like even just actually realizing that there's a human under all that is like, it took me a couple months.
Yeah.
And then at that point you're like, well, who am I going to be now? Because everything's different. So even if you go back to work, even, no matter what you do, you have cracked because somebody's exited your body and you have a new responsibility that is more, this is a lost person in your hand. It's
suddenly the most important thing in your life.
Yeah.
Out of the clear blue.
And it feels like you knew that it was going to be like that. And then it isn't, even if you don't like this person that came out of your body because you have postpartum depression or you just don't know what to do with all of that, it is still, because God says so, this human being is the most important thing in your life. And so, that's tricky.
Yeah.
And also, so your ministry just went on hold and you think, I'm going to have a maternity leave and then I'll be back.
Yeah. Right. And it's never the same.
It's never the same. And if it is, you're probably not doing it right. And it is really different with one baby that you start adding more kids and you have like different bedtimes, different personalities. These are actual human beings that need stuff. And so the more kids you add, the more complicated it is to make sure that their needs are being met, your husband's needs are being met, and your needs are being met. Because, you don't stop being a person just because you have children, but you do have to learn how to put yourself down the list.
So how'd you navigate that? So like, were there decisions that you had to make, very explicit decisions that you had to make along the way, things that you were going to prioritize to help you to better understand who you were?
Starting to develop an actual routine. And I don't know that I was good at that until after Sammy came. So after our second child.
Right.
During that time too, we moved because Sophie was 9 months old. We had a big move into Raytown. And then Sam actually went on staff at church.
Wow.
So our income
he got a pay cut because he had a good job too.
Between the two of us, our income went down 70%. Within 2 years. And so we had to sell toys, and like he had two great cars that he loved that had to go away forever. And just a lot of things like that to make it all happen. And,
so it's a lot of change really fast.
But the biggest thing was just, sometimes you just have to hold on. It's like,
go for the ride.
Yeah. You don't have to be good at it. That's one of the things I've learned, I think, is that I don't actually have to. Maybe that's my type A, like kind of getting sanded off the top. But I don't actually have to be good at all of it.
Yeah, because you always had really high expectations for yourself. And then to be in something that you're like, I'm not good at this.
No.
This is really hard.
Yeah.
It's kind of
awful.
Yeah, that'll break you.
Oh, yeah. So, and it felt like it was like, probably a better word is grind. Like I felt like I was just being ground up as time went on. So we had Sophie and then we had Sammy, and we were, during this time, like the college ministry was growing like weeds.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And my first priority was always to take care of my husband, whatever it was that he needed. And then to make sure I was taking care of Sophie. And I also, part of it was because of the way that Graceway did it, or KCBT did it at the time. But like I stayed out of, like I never handled money. I made sure that I was like discipling one person. Just kept my outside activities very small.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I did was, because I needed to be available for my husband in the evenings, I only did, and I still do this, I only did daytime, weekday discipling, ministry groups, that kind of thing. And Sam always gave me plenty of free. I mean, he didn't care what I did as long as I was available, and he had what he needed in the evenings and the weekends.
So you found a way. I mean, over time, you found a way to structure ministry into your life in a way
that worked,
that allowed you to make your priority ministry-wise your family.
But it happened very naturally. And during that time too, we went off nights. Like we went from being on Sunday mornings because we were too big. We had to move to Friday nights.
Yeah,
do you remember that?
Yeah.
And there were lots of kids. And so me being the person who had only changed maybe 2 diapers by the time I had children exit my body, I was in charge of the children's ministry. And
of course you were.
Well,
and at the point that was in that upper room, wasn't it?
It was in a small room, that kind of overlooked the area where we had the college ministry. And again, I knew nothing about kids. Like I had my own children.
You had me fooled, but I was like a 21-year-old guy.
But this is where that type A personality comes in, because I was like, I will learn all the things about children's ministry.
Right. Like even the way you do ministry now at MBT is different than the way you did it 5 years ago and then 5 years before that. Like to me, it seems like there's an evolution, and I can see how you allow yourself to adapt as your life changes. And I think that's hard for a lot of people to understand or to consider, that you don't always just get your way in ministry, and sometimes ministry happens to you and you have to adapt.
Absolutely. And 2, what is, like if God always had us doing the same thing, then we would never grow. And so I feel like all of these things that I've gone through or done, because caring for my father, like I had to pull out of ministry. I could do almost nothing because I was running dialysis 3 days a week. And, we had 36 medications to manage and, like all of these doctor's appointments and, taking care of them pulled me out of, I had to really decide. And Christine always uses this example of like one big thing, one little thing. Like you have a major thing, you have a minor thing, and then you have maybe an academic thing if you can handle it at the time. And so that's how I tried to structure my stuff. So, I've got mom's group, and then I have either one person that I'm going through the Titus 2 study with or a disciple and that's what I can handle. And sometimes I couldn't handle that. So I just had to be, able to wax and wane, because my top priorities are always the humans in my home. And then we reach out to the humans in our church body, and then we reach out, from there.
Right. So, in that process, what do you think a young woman needs to know or ask herself each time she faces one of these transitionary moments? Like, is there a question or a thought or a consideration that needs to be had each time they face? Because I think this is more true for men's in ministry. Sometimes their trajectory is a little straighter.
Right. Not
that God can't move them this way or that. Like, oh wait, now the Lord's told me to do missions here. Like those are big changes, and I get that. But the trajectory for men is sometimes a little bit straighter than it is for women.
Well, sometimes I think women end up on the whiplash trajectory, where it's like the guy turns, and then she's like, whoa, and it takes
she feels the ride is harder.
Well, partly because she's holding on to a lot of people and she's following behind. So,
it probably shouldn't be that way a lot, but it is sometimes.
But it is that way. And maybe it shouldn't be that way, but maybe it should.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I feel like I don't feel like I was ever left behind.
Right,
it just took me a while to catch up occasionally. And I think it was harder for my husband to be like, well, why aren't you doing X, Y, Z? And it's like, because I can't.
Right. Yeah.
So it took a lot of communication.
So when you're in that tail whip, like when women face that in ministry, what should they be asking themselves?
Well, for me, number one, I would say, hold on, honey.
Right. Yeah.
You'll get there.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, so hold your hand up.
Like
so
this.
Your hand is totally different than mine, right?
Yeah.
It's bigger and and you've played basketball. You got different calluses. And so all you have is what's in your hand. And the Lord doesn't actually hold you responsible for anything that he hasn't put in your hand. And so what I would say is, okay, you're going to go through this transition. It's going to be really hard. So what has the Lord put in your hand?
Yeah, that's
as
good.
a woman, your hand, not his hand. If you were to put your hand, if Sam puts his hand under mine, then it's bigger, but the reality is I can't hold what God put in his hand. I can only hold what God put in my hand.
Yeah.
And so and as time has gone on, what God's put in my hand has actually been really different than what God's put in Sam's hand. So like, I'm not the preacher, not in my hand. I don't have to worry about that. That's not something I have to make sure that he has food when he can't leave his desk because he's trying, like I have to make sure that he is attended to.
Yeah, the support part.
That he gets a good night's sleep, that the kids aren't yelling at midnight, like that's my area. Like I manage making sure that he has the environment he needs to provide for you guys what he needs to provide. And so that is actually very comforting because it's like, this is what I'm supposed to do with all my might, is this stuff that God's put in my hand.
That's good. And then how's your relationship with the Lord changed through all that? Like, what's it look like?
Well, I think with everybody, so I would say that my biggest things that I struggle with are like trust and fear, which kind of go together. And so I think the biggest thing for me with growing, grief, transitions, all of those things, my own medical stuff, is just learning that to just trust Jesus and trust the Lord with all my heart, don't lean on my own understanding, all those things make all the difference. Like the whole, whom have I in heaven but thee? What else am I going to do? I mean, you hang on because he's hanging on, you just, it happens naturally as you go. And so just finding some basic routine, having some discipline, not beating yourself up when you screw up because everybody does. And just like learning to live maybe gently is probably a good, where pain is gain. Well, no, not necessarily.
Yeah, you can beat yourself up to the point where
that's ridiculous.
There's no profit.
Well, and perfection is not the same for Jesus as it is for us. Like, I don't need everything to be shiny and slick. I just need to be mature and trusting the Lord with, that whole idea of perfection in the Bible and, having a perfect heart. Well, you're never going to have that without pain. So how do I do that? And just trust the Lord that it will happen as I follow him.
Yeah.
Like not try to be jumping from here to here. So, and then you can't compare yourselves, that verse, that was one of the things that Sam and I first talked about was that, comparing themselves among themselves, that they're not wise. One of the things that, and I talk about this a lot, is that even in the low points, or especially in the low points, I had to choose to do what I would say is just the next right thing. And that came from reading an Elizabeth Elliot book, probably when I was a teenager, and then seeing it come back up. Somebody had said, you just do the next thing. And I realized that sometimes for me, the next thing wasn't actually the right thing. And so for me, it needed to be the next right thing.
Yeah, right.
Because sometimes the next thing was just, to procrastinate and do something else. And the reality, the reality was I just needed to remember to do the next right thing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, especially with postpartum depression and things like that, that was like, you're just laying there trying to figure out what to through the fog and see, what's the next thing. And it's like, okay, what's the next right thing? Okay, this person that's in my hands, that's the next right thing. Yeah. Or, my sink is full of dishes. Maybe that's the next right thing. So just doing the next right thing has made a huge difference as far as, maybe I'm not necessarily looking, I'm in it for the long haul, but maybe I don't necessarily have the capacity in whatever. Like when my father died, I had cared for him so intensely for so many years that, really the next right thing was all I had. Because during, when you're caring for an ailing person, it's not actually hard to figure out what the next thing is.
Right, it's clear.
Yeah, it's like squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
But when but after, like, it's all gone, then what do you do?
Yeah, it feels like there's a void and you've got to figure out what's next.
Yeah, emotionally, spiritually, all those things, because, I'm not praying for my dad anymore. I'm not, asking for wisdom for those particular things. I'm, a lot of the things that I had that I was doing were just suddenly gone. And after, not like, it happened, it was after kind of an intense season. So it felt like it just dropped. And that plus, grief, and then figuring out how to care for my mom, who is a new widow, and, all of those things. The next right thing was really important until I could get to the point where I could start thinking about goals and,
It was a slow progression back to a place where you could actually maybe see 2 steps ahead or 3 steps ahead.
Yeah. And so with a baby, with any kind of trauma that you go through, with any kind of big change, I think you just have to trust the Lord to take you through those things naturally, and maybe not skip a bunch of steps because you think you should be further along than you are.
Yeah.
Just keep trucking. You don't get to stop.
Right.
But you also don't get to
circumvent.
Right. Be like, well, I'm supposed to be over here because all the cool people are there. And you actually haven't grown through any of the stuff that you need to grow through. So you're like a stringy vine and you never can make fruit. And so, you just got to grow naturally. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, that's good.
So take the pressure off.
Your husband's teaching pastoral procedures right now in LFBI. And so a lot of that conversation is for potential pastors, but also people who plan on supporting pastors, like whether it be married to them or just being congregates in a church and being there and having a right perspective of the pastorate and the roles and the responsibilities associated with that position. What do you think that people need to know about the life of a pastor and his family? What do congregants need to know or consider when they're thinking about you and your family?
So I can only speak from MBT because my peers in ministry have way different pressures than I do. I always say I set the bar super low so that because I don't actually do anything except what I feel like God has absolutely called me to do. So like when we first started MBT, I did children's ministry because for one thing, there was no one else. Like somebody had to do it, but I didn't have like a vision for the ministry or, I was literally just hanging on by my fingernails until God brought the right person to, poor Chris. I was like, here you go, just chucking it at him.
Right.
But I do also like control so that, I have to be careful not to get my fingers in places where I am not needed. Or wanted, or maybe wanted but not needed. I have to be really careful to try and make sure that I'm not so involved in everybody's stuff that I can't be involved in what my husband needs me to be involved in. Right. So, am I called to it? Is always my first question about that. And then he's my top priority. So we may not be able to like attend all the things or do all the things or but our priorities, my priority is support the minister because that's my job. And then whatever else is gravy. Yeah. Like that's, wonderful. I'm called to disciple. Everyone is. No. But I have children, so I'm called to disciple them first.
Right. And so just since we're here doing this, your testimony and your example has been awesome for my wife.
Oh, well, praise God.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for being here.
My
really
pleasure.
Appreciate it. And we also want to thank you for joining us for another episode of The Postscript. If you enjoyed this conversation with Cheryl, it was inspiring to you, you should go to Living Faith Fellowship's website, lffellowship.com, and visit the blog there. And you can find her blog post on this very topic of what it's like to be a pastor's wife and to do ministry and to navigate that. And so we believe that would be an encouragement to you. There should be a link in the show notes this week, so you should find it there. Also, if you're interested in LFBI, you can go to lfbi.org and you can learn about all of the classes that we're offering through our Bible Institute. And we want to encourage you to sign up either for summer or fall classes that are coming up. Thanks again. God bless.